In the same way that the communities of Indianapolis and Le Mans take pride in their links with two great races, so does a small town in the Midlands of Tasmania cherish its place as a one-time mecca for Grand Prix drivers from all around the world. One person who remembers just what it meant to the hamlet of Longford is reporter Neil Kearney. He journeyed home to another time and place in the history of Australian motorsport.
Longford lies on the South Esk River, some 15 miles from Launceston, the northern capital of Tasmania. A typical small Tasmanian country centre in a typical setting. Nothing much has changed Longford since pioneering days. It has no suburban crowding, no peak hour traffic tangles, no great noisy marshalling yards or smoke-belching factories, but it does have what has become recognised as the fastest and best Grand Prix circuit in the South Pacific. And this is why they come to Longford. Grand Prix racing began over 50 years ago.
A quarter of a century has gone by now, but this old pub in our little town was once the centre of the universe. Well, for one glorious long weekend every March from 1953 until 68, the perennial murmur of the sheep was shattered by the fastest and most famous car races on earth. All the kid needed was one of these, a Jack Brabham badge for 5 shillings, and you had an entree to a fantastic world.
What time it was, and what a time it was. A time of innocence, a time of confidences. Long ago.
World champions Hill, Surtees, Stewart, McLaren all raced around the country lanes that made up Longford's 4.5-mile road circuit. And of course, there was Brabham. We worshipped Brabham.
The centre of attraction in this race, and indeed the whole meeting, is Australian-born Jack Brabham, reigning world driving champion. Other entrants include...
For weeks beforehand and afterwards, every kid in our school in every running race became Jack Brabham. And as a quarter of Tasmania's entire population joined us to watch the races, we'd cheer for Brabham, perched behind the hay bales that we thought made us safe.
There's no catching Brabham now as he streaks down the final straight. All opposition has been left far behind.
This was Pub Corner, the part of the course which passed through the town, and as school kids, we'd gather here behind a few hay bales, wide-eyed and open-mouthed, usually cheering for Jack Brabham. We witnessed some incredible deeds unfold. Every year there seemed to be either a tragedy or a comedy. The most bizarre was when Lex Davison crashed his car into the wall of the pub. The car was a write-off and everyone here gasped. Then old Lex stepped out of the car, walked into the bar of the pub and scoffed down a beer. And today, as we look back through our amber-coloured glasses, we reminisce in the Lex Davison bar.
Here is Lex Davison, 4 times winner of the Australian Grand Prix, and his...
He was one of many of that era's champion racers who was later to die at the wheel. Great names performing spectacular deeds in a country town where it all seemed so unreal. I was 7 years old when, with 50 other school kids standing behind the hay bales on Pub Corner, we witnessed the crash that killed young American Tim Mayer. Mayer's Cooper Climax hit a roadside tree, hurling him 100 feet to land with a sickening thud outside the pub door. When we opened our eyes, his car's motor had landed just a few feet from us. But fortunately, the crashes weren't always so tragic.
Crashing into a tree. Miraculously, Burns is extricated from the wrecked Jaguar, unharmed except for a slight scratch on his lower lip.
On a dusty corner, a Victorian Austin Lancer nearly comes to grief, but skillful driving pulls him out of a sticky situation.
The safety barriers and the roads were at best agricultural, and because the entire circuit was open roads, there was even a railway crossing.
Away go the 16 starters on the first of their 25 laps to take them...
Why it's now just a memory is because a little town of barely 2,000 couldn't survive in the billion-dollar industry of Grand Prix racing. This was the 1968 Australian Grand Prix won by Pierre's Courage, another to later die on a foreign battlefield. But the rain this day caused the crowds to stay away, and the financial flop sentenced Longford to a sudden death that was final.
What a dream I had.
So we returned to our pioneering origins, to a feed of mutton bird from a store where the shopkeeper still serves you, in a town where neon signs are, thankfully, few. And there's not much left of the old circuit. The roads are overgrown and both bridges have been pulled down. There's just an old pub and a few boozers who look out and see what used to be. Jack Brabham.
That is too.
It's Jack Brabham.
Yeah, up the street. Yeah. Oh, look at that. It's been a while, I reckon, since he's been around here, hasn't it?
He's come back to Longford. Jack Brabham. On the bar, this is Roscoe, an organ, Reg. Jack Brabham really has come back to Longford, to the pub where the locals still talk about how Jack and his mates would yarn about their day's racing.
After each event, of course, we always used to come into the hotel here and have a drink together and talk about all the things that we should have done in the race or didn't do in the race or what happened to us and all that sort of thing. It was a great meeting point here.
And just as we lament those lost days of innocence, he too recalls a Grand Prix like no other.
This was really the only circuit that had that sort of unique atmosphere of the country town. It certainly was a country town meeting. It certainly brings back a lot of old memories. Actually, we had some wonderful times down here. It was a race meeting that was a wonderful social gathering. You know, it was we felt as if we're almost part of the public down here.
There's no catching Brabham now as he streaks down the final straight. All opposition has been left far behind, and another victory awaits the world champion.
Sir Jack won Longford twice, but his most spectacular drive was one race morning when he was held up by mechanical trouble at his Launceston garage. Instead of waiting for the trailer, Brabham drove his open wheeler for 12 miles along the public roads, amongst normal traffic going to the races, just to get to the grid on time.
5 miles an hour.
It's a pity really the circuit's not here right now, just as it was. But if it was here now, I'm sure I could go out there, drive quite fastly around the circuit, and I'd remember every corner and every bump on the circuit.
You knew it that well.
Yes.
Well, if I really begged you, would you take me for a run round the circuit?
Well, I'd love to have a run around the circuit.
What a dream I had.
A generation ago, it was the Jack Brabham badge that got us into the dream world of fast cars and magical names. And though this motor is a new Honda and the old circuit's overgrown, Sir Jack is taking us on a fantasy for one last lap. Past Rocky's Tavern, around Tannery Corner, along the Flying Mile where he tops speeds of 170 miles an hour.
Circles down the Flying Mile close to top speed and is rewarded with the news that he's gained 2 more precious seconds.
A quick detour to open the odd farm gate. Then down under the viaduct, past the Willows, where the triple world champ often overtook the slower cars.
Winners of 3 world championships between them, both striving for that little bit extra to decide the issue.
Now Brabham takes his line for the run into Pub Corner. And for the last time, Jack Brabham rounds Pub Corner, where Lex Davison drank that beer, where the young American died, and where a country town stores its keepsakes of a remarkable time.
Preserve your memories, they're all that's left you.